Welcome to the first Gaia Science podcast. I'm sure previously you already watched our first video by Miss Vicky where we talk about the proper technique pipetting, also common errors in pipetting. So today, continue to that, we will a little bit explore more about different type of pipettings, different type of pipette tips, and what are their application. So today, I'm glad to have you, Dr. Tan, as our honorable guest today. So Dr. Tan is the business development manager from Gaia Science, and he's a graduate from Malaysia University, mainly focused in the biomedical science. So Dr. Tan, we're talking about pipette tips. There are so many options out there, and some people, for me, are very clueless. We have a bulk tips, we have a rack as well, and they are like short, extra long, MLS, I don't know what's about there, and you also have a low tension, a big hole as well. There are so many out there, but how to choose? First, the question that might encounter as a new researcher like me, if we have bulk and we have rack, what are the big difference and how we should choose it?
Interesting. Good question, actually. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for having me, by the way. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this video as well. You can say taken a lot of effort to list down a lot of different things that we have, right? Including the ones that you raised. I think bulk, rack tips, even others as well, sterile, non-sterile, and so on and so forth, right? So hopefully some of the earlier videos that you've seen have actually tried to sort of share a little bit on what kind of things you could do, the proper techniques, right? But again, even though the rack techniques that you have, right, if you don't have the rack tips, then it defeats the purpose of having a good techniques, I would say, right? So yeah, let's get right into it. As you said, the first question that a lot will tend to choose is bulk or rack, right? So the analogy I would use is basically on what you're going to do with the tips, right? So are you looking at autoclaving it yourself, right? You have empty boxes in mind, and then you're budget constrained in that sense, right? So if you're really budget constrained, then you would tend to get bulk tips. If you can see, I think on the table right here, right? So the bulk tips, right? I think it comes in a few colors, of course, right? Thanks for that. Yeah, really, really nice ones, right? By the way, it's Gaia Science, local brand. Please support local. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Why not, right? So yeah, bulk tips is actually good because you actually get really affordable price, right? And you can actually re-rack them as many times as you want. If you notice any racks, right, empty racks in your labs, they normally have 96 holes. So each pack normally comes in 1,000. So you can re-rack them 10 times, right? So at that expense, right, you're actually saving a lot as well by going with bulk, right? Re-racking 96 times, right? Rather than getting new racks all the time as well, right? But obviously, if you're looking for convenience, right, rather than actually just buying bulk and then doing it manually, wearing gloves, putting it every time, autoclave 10 times, right? If you get racks, basically you can just use it on the spot at one go.
I see.
Yeah, that's the main difference I would say for using both bulk and rack tips. Yeah.
I see. There's a interesting outlook. I think you mentioned somewhere along the line that bulk is cheaper compared to rack. Does it mean that quality has been compromised between those two, or is it quality is the same? It's just whether is it sterile or non-sterile? What say you about that one?
Well, I would say that buying bulk, right, doesn't really compromise the quality because whether is it bulk or is it sterile, the manufacturers would actually manufacture all of them equally. It's just that one is packed in bulk like this, one of them is packed in rack, basically, right? And it leads to another good question, whether is it sterile or not sterile in a sense, right? Yeah.
Because out there, they also have bulk and rack, and also there are comparison between sterile and non-sterile.
Yes,
so
that's right.
What say you about that one?
Okay. Normally, bulk tips are actually non-sterile, okay? And that's because, right, if you pack it like this and you open it up, right, every single tip is actually already, you can say, compromised of its sterility, I would say, right? So this is where those that are very concerned about whether how sterile is it, right, they will go with racked tips instead. When you get any rack tips, right, from outside, right, whether you buy in cartons or you buy in single ones, right, it's always individually wrapped. And that's the key point here.
Yes,
when it's individually wrapped, right, the sterility is maintained until you open it. And normally when it's wrapped, you will tend to open it inside the biosafety cabinet as well, when it's already been sprayed down with alcohol as well. So you know that it's guaranteed sterile, especially if your work requires it to be sterile in the first place, so that you do not cross contaminate with a lot of things as well, right? Yeah.
So I guess put it this way, of course, bulk is cheaper compared to rack. It's not to conclude that one, but it's cheaper than rack. But then, if you're using bulk, it will take you a lot of time for you to put in the rack in a way that actually it will consume you. It will be costlier because you spend more time doing what your student do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good point there. But having said about sterile and non-sterile, what are the criteria that you refer to sterile? Is it like clean? Is it odorless? Or is there something like RNAs, something like, what are things that you should consider when talking about sterile?
You're talking about sterile, just go through and have a look first. Sorry for that. Normally, normally when you say sterile, right, you will normally need, in those situations where it's actually free of DNA, free of RNAs, okay, maybe free of ATP and also pyrogens as well. So it would be more for those that requires in terms of molecular work, right? Because it tends to be anything that is in there, right? Even a very small fragment that you never think of, it might actually affect your results, right? So, if, like example, if you're doing any fluorometric, colorimetric, right, assays, right, that requires precision, even quantitative PCR as well. By using a non-sterile one, you're risking yourself by having some other foreign objects, right, that could affect the results. And even like a small amount could make a change with whether is it there or not, positive or negative results.
I see.
So that's a big one, I would say. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of you guys out there is thinking, if let's say why not just purchase a bulk pack which is not sterile, put inside the rack and autoclave. And actually it was still going to kill all the bacteria, isn't it? I think I'm sure you guys would think, why I want to purchase a rack? It's more expensive. And then if I do autoclave, also will be sterile. But I guess this is something that you always need to highlight, that autoclave is not going to be 100% sterile compared to purchasing a rack. So what are the things that you think might be different between autoclave, the sterilization through autoclave, and the one that's sterile when we get from the manufacturer?
Okay, so when it's sterile from the manufacturer, then you know that you can ready use already. Now, you can say, yes, I can just take bulk this and then autoclave it myself as well. But you got a few issues as well, actually. Okay, some of them are not autoclavable the second time. Okay, so there is no guarantee, right, whether the shape, the build of it, even the performance, right, aspirating or dispensing, right, the exact amount, right, would be still the same or not, right? Because when the manufacturer does the manufacturing and put it into the rack already, they already tested it and confirmed that if you use it as is, you will get the exact amount. But when you buy bulk, right, again, you have to remember, I could be shaking it around, not throwing it around. So, and then you autoclave it as well, right? So the autoclaving, it's again done at your own risk and not done by the manufacturer's specs as well, right? So the quality of it might be affected, right? So you might see changes that you might not catch it until later on, right? So that's the first reason why that sometimes autoclaving it on your own might be a bit, might be not advisable, right, compared to racking. Second one, again, like you're saying, right, so the autoclaving process might not be so consistent, okay? So again, that means that if, let's say, I do it, right, I'm autoclave it at a certain way, and I might be maybe within that, you can say there's a net, right, I think, right, the metal net, then you put all those racks accordingly, right, and then you might put some bottles as well, right? So I autoclave it, and then maybe there will be some residue at the back. And then you come in, and then you autoclave it with just those racks as well. It is possible that the whatever I've done previously might not be clean, right, or might have some stuff that might go into your tips. Right. Despite we buying the same tips, we might be in the same lab. We buy the same tips, we get the same rack, we autoclave it different times, but your tips in that rack might not be so sterile compared to mine. I see. Right. So that is one of those areas where it can be concerning, and it's sometimes out of your hand as well, in that sense. Right. I would also say that basically autoclave tips, right, which you buy from bulk, are not 100% RNAs and DNAs free as well, right? So sometimes, right, if you're working with certain sensitive arrays that work with DNA and RNA related work, it's better to get.
If you're working with RNA RNA or DNA section. We don't want to get your protein denatured, isn't it?
Yeah, or even PCR as well.
Yeah,
right. So those are the ones where you want to just get the sterile one straight away, right? Just solve all the problems that you might just get from getting bulk.
Betul.
Yeah.
I guess what we can conclude here is that yes, true, you can get a bulk tips, autoclave it, you get sterile. But you have to bear in mind, as mentioned by the time, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're doing autoclaving might not be 100% sterile. And if let's say thing goes wrong, you will end up spend more to redo your experiment. Am I right?
Yeah,
because autoclave essentially is just going to kill the bacteria. It's going to go to 121 degrees Celsius at certain pressure, going to kill all the bacteria. But that doesn't make sure your RNAs you'll be free of RNAs. You make sure it's free from DNAs. And of course, if you go for like a human or higher level works, talking about pyrogens or endotoxin is something that is very hard for you to achieve. And again, I think it's something mentioned by Dr. as well. When you're autoclaving, are you sure it's going to be clean? Basically clean after that, because sometimes when you autoclave, you're not just going to autoclave only the tips. Sometimes you also autoclave with the bottle as well, and maybe the residue or previous run of the autoclave have some decontamination process, which is something what to avoid.
I see. Definitely. Yeah.
But talking about autoclave, there's a myth where people say that a filtered tips you cannot autoclave, and if you want to use a filtered tips, you have to get from the manufacturer. But talking about filtered tips, what are the difference between normal pipette tips and the filtered one?
Okay, good question. Yeah, that's one of the things where I also get a lot of questions of, because like you might have bulk and then filtered and then sterile filtered. Okay, so actually, right, I was reading around, right. Firstly, you can't autoclave filter tips, right? That's because, right, autoclave requires the part where it's going to be wet, right? So you can read out a bit online about the process, but basically, right, there's a part where some of your items will get a little bit wet. If you've done autoclaving before, there's a period where it will be like full of steam. That steam can go to any part that is been exposed, including the filter as well. So the filter, if it's wet, then basically that's it, you cannot use. Which is why normally you don't really autoclave the filtered tips. Okay. Now, in terms of the purpose, it's actually quite interesting. Okay. So the first one is basically, right, you would prevent actually any item to go inside the pipette. Right. I think that's the obvious one if you think about it. The pipette, if you've seen the tips, right, I'm sure you can put a picture up there, so on, right? The pipette itself, right, would have a filter right at the top. Okay. So if you imagine the pipette like this, the pipette tip, like this. There's a filter above here, and then after that, you might aspirate or basically take up your sample up to here, right? So sometimes when you're using a pipette, you might be actually going it upside down, putting sideways, that it might go back into the pipette, right? So that filter stops that from entering, actually, right? Now again, that is more for pipettes where doesn't have the filter inside as well. I think if you see the lineup over here, right, I think we have the Vista Lab that has the filter in there. So that filter tip might not be too necessary for those models, but otherwise, like the normal ones, I think is, correct me here, Metaller brand, right?
Yes,
Thermo brand,
right.
Sartorius, Gilson, basically any of the normal pipettes, right, that doesn't have
I think we're supposed to mention the brand, but we can always remove that part.
Not to mention brand, is it?
It's okay.
Not to mention brand, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So I just basically all the normal pipettes. Okay, you can cut somewhere, right? Yeah. So I can just start from here, I guess, right? So as you see right here, so these are some of the types of pipe.
I think we can mention about Vista Lab, but then like other brand Metaller, I don't know. Should we mention? Is there any concern? Any brand that we carry, but Sartorius, I don't think we should mention.
No, but we can mention that they don't have a filter, right?
Yeah, I think
that was the main purpose also, right? So because we're talking about tips, not we're talking about the pipette, actually, right? So like purpose why that some might use it, right?
I think can proceed.
Okay, so just start, I guess, from the Vista Lab part. Okay, then also because there are some pipettes where, like example, I think some if I've seen before, correct me here, if is it Metaller or Appendorf or Sartorius or Gilson, I think, if I'm not mistaken, even D-Lab. Right. I mean, those are out there in the market.
Yes.
Right. Doesn't really matter whether we carry it on. Right. So, they might not have a filter in there.
Okay.
Right. Again, I cannot 100% guarantee. You can double check and see. And those situations, right, if let's say the user is very new, right, then it's better to have a pipette tip that has a filter, just in case, right? Fatigue, you might accidentally put it upside down, or you might be thinking about something and you put it sideways, it goes straight in. It's very difficult to actually clean, right? It might affect the gearings and so the vacuum as well of the pipettes, no more normal pipettes as well.
Yeah, and then worse to that, now we go to a question about the sterility as well. Let's say you're working with a very contagious sample, and then you accidentally contaminate your pipette tips, then can you still be used that pipette? If let's say your pipette can be autoclave, that's fine, that's good. If let's say, how about if your pipette cannot be autoclave or cannot be fully autoclave? That is something that always try to avoid, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think then the filter part helps to prevent that as well, right? So to make sure that there's nothing goes into the pipette and the next user doesn't cross-contaminate as well. I think that's the biggest one as well, on top of being sterile as well. Now, I'll also add basically, right, that I was saying the filter shaft will keep it clean. Anything else? That's okay. I will also mention that basically, right, pipette tips, right, with filter, right, is very good, as I mentioned just now, for first-time users, right. So obviously, I'm sure you watching this video out there, right, that's looking at the pipette tips, right. You might be first-time users. You might be in doing your work, coming in from degree or masters, and after that you first time are actually doing pipette for the first time, right? Okay. So you have like in your maybe 20-25 years, again this is presumption as well, right? Where you never hold a pipette before. I got one or two that told me that they never held a pipette before, and because this is their first lab work, right, and they want to do masters or PhD, then this is the time where they use it. Right. So for them to suddenly go into this direction, for example, let me see. Maybe those that are doing microbes before that, right? Maybe they never really used a pipette before.
Yes, particularly those who are really like a very research oriented, but not really on the hams. Maybe more like they call it epidemiology, is it? Study on the statistic or that. Maybe they have to do a bit of work or research work. That's where they start to use pipette tips.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Or maybe those coming from industry that they do the big scale, then suddenly have to go into research level, do small scale as well, right? Yes. So it's possible that they have never held a pipette before. Then the filter tips is like a training. Like a training tool, right? So it's where they put and then they make sure that they're able to do the aseptic techniques correctly. Again, please watch the videos,
because I think one of the key things that Bess mentioned just now is for those who never use pipette, they cannot differentiate between the first stop and the second stop. They might to aspirate accidentally more what the pipette can hold. And somehow, let's say you trying to aspirate, sometimes you can always go beyond the pipette level, right?
Of course.
Your pipette can hold 1000 microliter, but sometimes you can actually aspirate more. If let's say you release too fast, then the liquid will go up. But if you have a filter, then I think this is something that can avoid.
That's a good point, actually. Yes, that's also true. It helps to, just in case where if you do not hold it correctly and it slips from your hand, it push up suddenly, it might jump up, and then the filter is like a net that catch it basically. That's right. Yeah.
I think that's good. But how about those who are already familiar with pipettes and how to operate that? Because I'm sure we also know that actually there's aerosol. Sometimes when you're working with a volatile sample or sometimes highly contagious sample, although you only seeing use of the pipette tips, but sometimes you can still got cross-contamination, which I believe with filtered tips, it can solve this issue, am I right?
Technically speaking, yes, because aerosols are very, you can say, high viscous, right? And basically it will become vapor very easily as well, right? In very sometimes stable conditions, surprisingly. That vapor itself, right, that actually could go up through the filter. If it's unfiltered, it goes up to the chamber and condenses it there. So it is possible that can happen as well. So the filter acts as a way to capture that sort of like gaseous. So like alcohol would be one of those examples. If it's like really high percentage, right, and it can easily evaporate as well, right? So those are the things you want to avoid as well. I'll just mention as well, right? So the filter tips, right, are actually good not just for aerosol situations, but also which actually help for forensics and diagnostics, by the way. Also it will also help for if you're working with DNA RNA solutions. It will also help with like infection samples as well. Alright, it also maybe if you have radio labeled samples, it's good to use filter tips actually. Okay, so you don't want the radioactive stuff to be flying all over the place, right?
I see.
You don't want us to be Incredible Hawks after that, right?
Well,
who knows, right? So yeah. So especially like you said for aerosols, volatile, corrosive, and vicious samples are one of those that you want to avoid. You want to use filter tips so that you avoid getting somebody faint as well, right? I mean, there's a case where I remembered where someone like left the gas open a bit, or maybe didn't cap it properly, and then it was spreading around, faint because of that, right? And the gas sometimes could be odorless as well, right? So that's the danger about it, right? And one last one is actually if you're using strong acids, strong bases, you also want to avoid like splashing, so you use filter tips as well to prevent that from going up the chamber. I think those are the few conditions for a very you can say advanced advanced researcher, right? That might use filter tips despite already being very familiar with the techniques.
I believe there are some cases where if you're talking about cell culture work, or when those are very sensitive for the contamination or that, there was also a safety technique where they inform you cannot simply replace the pipette tips, or you cannot simply use this pipette for different work. If this pipette is used for the inside the biosafety cabinet, that's it is. You cannot take it out because they're afraid when you do this kind of thing, maybe when you aspirate a different liquid, maybe you will some contamination will stick the pipette and bring it to the biosafety cabinet. I think these are something that also have to be considered. If you're not using a filtered tips, this might happen, right? And stay the same. Just to wrap up, as mentioned earlier, pipette tips or the filtered pipette tips you cannot autoclave because you don't want to get wet.
The filtered ones.
The filtered one,
The bulb is okay, but again, like I was saying, it's just problems with this with the shape and the size that could be affected. But again, that doesn't mean that you cannot autoclave the bulk tips, right? If your technique is always autoclaving the bulk tips, right, then you definitely can do so, right? And if all the experiments came from autoclaving the bulk tips, that's fine. Just that you can't autoclave the filtered tips, right? I do know that they do sell bulk filtered tips as well, but those bulk filtered ones cannot be autoclaved as well. But you could rack it and use it as normal as well, and it's the same purpose as well. Like I said, it could be for those that are doing chemicals that doesn't need to be sterile, right? Yes. Or like first time users. So there is. I don't see it so often, right? I'm sure you. Not sure whether you've seen it often as well, right?
No, very rare. But I know that type exists. Filtered bulk pack.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I guess we don't want to get things wet. I mean, particularly talking about filtered tips.
Yes.
So you also mentioned something more like molecular work research or that.
Yep.
And then it's more common if you're talking about molecular work. If you go to their lab, you notice some of the pipette tips are longer than normal one. I guess this is something they call it as extra long pipette tips.
Yes, correct. Right? Yes. It could be extra long. I think it could be, they call it maximum recovery as well, I'm not mistaken. But I think that might be for a different purpose. I think we'll talk about it a bit short while. But generally speaking, yes, there are long and there are short tips as well. Okay. So again, this is really case by case basis. Generally speaking, the ones you see over here are all short. And even in my work last time in Monash as well, cell culture by the way. I mean, most of us cell culture, we have gone through a lot of the plating, right, and also a lot of incubation, right, and requires a lot of using pipettes, and also tips as well. We go through quite a lot as well, depending whether you're doing multi-channel or not, right? So obviously, most of the time that we use is always short tips, right, and that is good enough because we can say one is that most of the work requires very short hand movement, right? And like most of the time, right, we can be very close to at least to the plates, and then we can actually precisely seed if you want to for cell culture. But other work maybe is to mix and so on. Sometimes we work with very short bend-off tubes, right? And then we just need a very short tip to do so, right? However, there are situations where you need it long, right? So sometimes depending on your pipette as well, maybe your pipette would be maybe the shaft is too short, right? So the long tips would compensate for that, So this is short tip, this is the long tip, right? If you imagine, you know me that, right? Your shaft, then short tip, long tip. Helps for 15 and 50 centrifuge tubes when you're trying to go in, right? So that the long tips will be able to reach all the way down there, right? So you're able to aspirate up and down. It doesn't affect the volume you aspirate and dispense, okay? Because again, that depends on the way that it's being manufactured, but it's more on the practical use, and then like whether is it easy for you to aspirate up and down. Now, obviously, using long tips means, for example, like if I hold a pen, right, okay, not sponsored, okay, if you're using a long one like this, right, so sometimes, right, if you think about it, you have to move around, so the lot of movement you need to go, you might hit some stuff around. So using a short tip is actually easier as well to maneuver around. So there's pros and cons of using both, but this one is more on preference rather than, and practicality rather than a specific use case.
I see. I guess more of the factors are, of course, based on the application, because if you're using more on molecular work, you handle with very small volume, they prefer to use extra long. Is it because the design, the shape is longer, so you can see the liquid being aspirated?
Another thing about it, it is possible, but actually it depends on the user actually. Long or short, you should still be able to see the either the liquid level go up and down basically, but those are actually graded ones. So if you're specifically looking for those that have markers, right, 50, 100, 150, there are pipette tips out there that is graduated, they call it, right, where there's a marking, at a certain level, right, and you're able to say, okay, if I draw 50, exactly 50 comes out. Though it doesn't matter whether it's short or long. I've seen before where the long ones, right, where they actually use for PCR, right, where they want to load, right, and then after that they might use a longer tip so that they get a better angle. Whether they're using a short one so that like they have more room to flex, I would say, right? I think that's one of those.
That's one of those. I see. Because extra long, correct me if I'm wrong, the shape also is a bit thinner toward the end.
Technically speaking, is towards
the
end.
If you're working with gel, like process gel, the gap, or if you're doing SDS page as well, the well is quite small, isn't it? Those are very like pre-Parkinson's symptom, like very shaky hand. I think this will help them a lot, right?
I think Parkinson's one is more like we are too, like our hand has been what do you call very tired already after a long day. That's why like, oh no, because some pipettes you get a hole very tight after so long, right? Unlike the ones over here, right? So sometimes that alone would. I have got through before where you might, just a slight twitch. That's it, right? Your gel you could break it. So having having a long one at least can help you to compensate for that a bit.
Agree. Maybe because they are not using an ergonomic pipette, which Gaia Science will offer. Check this out later. All right. We're talking about so many things, but there are so many brands out there.
Good question. Actually, yes, that's right.
And people will ask, if I'm using brand A, is it same as brand B? Is it same as brand C? And then now, as the market global, we have brand from the overseas, like from the Europe brand. And also there are a few brands come from China. The price is like differ a lot, but is it the same? Is it I think the first question they will ask, can it fit in my pipette or not? So what do you think about it? Universal and brand specific pipette tips.
Okay, I'll tell you in 2 words only. I wish all brands were equal, but unfortunately, no. Okay, I mean that's the truth answer actually. So the only way I can see is like this. You talk about pipette tips, right? So there are, I would say there's 2 categories on this. Okay, so let's say let's go back in terms of like saying different brands, right? So unfortunately, they are all not equal, right? Doesn't matter whether is it from China or is it made in the US or even made in Malaysia as well, right? So basically, if you have different brands out there, right? So most of them are made slightly different, so they could be millimeters different, right? And also even the the materials. The raw materials that they use to make the pipette tips might be different as well. So there might be some variations as well to the final product as well, right? So I would say that although they might say, although they're different brands, right, and sometimes they say they are universal as well, right? So obviously they might not fit perfectly, right, onto your pipette. So the best way is to actually get a small sample, request actually if you can, right? And they should provide you a small pack, which we do have, by the way. So contact us on that, right? To actually try and see whether it fits onto your pipette perfectly, and then not just whether it can fit, and also you can eject it correctly. Make sure it can also aspirate to the exact amount that you normally work with. So if you have a 200, so if you have 1,000, for example, pipette, right? So you try and see whether you can aspirate exactly 1,000, and then you can actually eject out. Also making sure that the tips that you get can fit into the rack as well. Okay, so it doesn't matter what kind of rack you have, whether which brand also rack you have. So whichever brand that you get, if they say it's universal, you check for that as well. Now, obviously, talking about brands, right? When they have the pipette, they do have the pipette tips as well. And those, when they call it branded tips, the tips are already manufactured in a way that it will fit perfectly to their own pipette only. Right. So yes, you can get those pipette tips. Doesn't matter is it bulk or rack or sterile or filtered. Right. There is a whole group itself where it's all branded to a specific brand of your own pipette. Now, the catch here is that when you get those kind of pipettes tips, right, they have been already tested as well, properly tested to fit perfectly into their pipette. Right, and that takes a lot of time and research and perfection to do that. That means that the cost also of getting that particular tips, right, branded ones, right, not universal ones, branded ones, is also more pricey as well. But with the guarantee of it will always fit into your pipette.
Agree. So there are two things. If let's say you are changing to a new brand of pipette tips, right, there are two things you need to consider. First, as mentioned by you, is either can it fit to their pipette, and secondly, can it fit to their pipette rack? Is it numb or not? Because sometimes, talking about pipette rack, sometimes when you refill a pipette rack, then when you try to get a pipette tips from using a pipette, it's stuck there.
Oh yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, this is something that sometimes people might miss out that one. So agree with you. Different brand have different size. I guess same as the iPhone as well. Different phone have different charging cable. Like we have Android, they have their own cable. You have Type-C, and then iPhone they have their own cable.
That's true.
I guess it is what it is, lah. But the golden tip is that as long as you get your sample, you try it first, validate by yourself, only you proceed with that one. Right?
That's actually true. Yes. So one of the things that I would advise, and I think I've told you before as well, right, is that although they might be say universal, best to fit it, test it, and see whether it fits to your needs, right? The best way to know that it doesn't fit is that when you put it in, no matter how hard you put it in, and if it still comes loose after that, then you know that it's not a perfect fit. If it doesn't fit into the rack as well to autoclave, definitely those universal tips is not suitable as well, right? And basically, let me think anything else. If let's say, if you aspirate up and then you can still see there is some issues as well, like bubbling and so on, right? Then definitely it might not be the right ones as well. So especially if there's anything left in the residue, right? That's one of the things when you know, okay, this pipette tip might not be suitable even for my needs as well, even though it fit perfectly. So a lot of factors are. It's something like, you know, if we can use the analogy of car, right? So some people might like, you know, Proton. Some people might like the Perodua, right?
Okay.
I mean, local brands, by the way, yeah. So because normally, I don't,
Support local,
support local, yeah.
Okay.
I normally seen either it's Proton or Perodua, right? So some people might like the Perodua MyV 2022, I think it's MyV because I think that time Kalisa was. And Kanchi was like many years ago, right?
Yes.
Anyway, come back to the analogy. So some people might like the MyV style. Some people might like Saga, right? So, but both is also cars. Both can get you around. Both can get the job done. You know, go back to work, go to work, and then go home as well, right? Same with tips. If the tips are able to fit and you like it as well, and it matches your requirements, doesn't matter whether it's research lab or even in GMP certified labs as well. Then I think you're fine.
Yeah.
I
mean, it doesn't matter whether it's made in USA, made in England, made in China, or made in Malaysia. As long as it works as it's supposed to be, then why not, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You know, the other time, this is something that always puzzles me. It's made me thinking. I feel like those who do this pipette tips design was made by men. You know why?
Why?
Because they are not lying. They are lying about the size. They say it's universal. But when we try, it's not numb to all. It doesn't fit.
Okay.
So that's why I feel, because men always lie about their size.
Really?
Anyway,
I mean, it's. Wait, is it a human thing? I mean, they're saying man thinks one way, women thinks one way, right? So,
well, let's not go too far.
okay, yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so I think you mentioned a good point just now. Like different pipette brand, they might use different different materials into their production.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of the key things that if they're using different materials, it will affect the quality. I guess the key things we're talking about pipette tips quality is the retention.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And there are pipette out there, the normal sterile, and you also have not sterile plus low retention.
Mm-hmm.
What are the different?
Good question. So this, the low retention part is very specific case, right? And it really comes down to your use case actually. Okay. Now I'll put it this way. Unlike the very typical general tips out there, right? Okay. So normally those low retention ones, right? They can retain less liquid. Okay. So you can also provide basically more accurate, consistent results as you aspirate and dispense many times. Okay? Yeah. And it's very helpful when you only have, like example, 5 microliters of your sample. And this sample you went to somewhere in Borneo, for example, and then go to the forest and pick it up. And that's the only amount you have left, right? So the last thing you do is you have a normal one and then it goes everywhere into the pipette and that's it. You cannot get it out from the pipette again, right? Doesn't matter whether it's sterile. Let's say if it's sterile, right? Even if it's non-low retention or normal tip, it might go in and then you cannot get it out. You're dead. Okay. So the low retention one helps to exactly aspirate up, right? And then after that to dispense exactly the right amount. So that's a big price point about that. Yeah. But again, obviously with low retention, right, which means that it's going to be more expensive than bulk tips, right? So make sure you know exactly what you're using them for, right? So it's not like a typical tip that you normally get. Okay, it's normally when you're using for like PCR, maybe cloning or sequencing, or even certain RNA DNA applications as well. Or even they're using for SHPH or protein, right? You want to use for other analysis related to the protein, right? Where you need precision, and like I was saying just now, right, with the other types of categories, right? Right, for the tips, right? Any small amount of I remember sterile and non-sterile ones, right? So any small amount of like foreign contaminant or foreign objects, right, can affect the results. So when with DNA, RNA, and protein, right, where it requires high precision, right, low retention is actually important in that level. Yeah. I will also say that basically, right, that the low retention tips actually would help to produce basically a lot of more significant results, right, when you're using like viscous or low surface tension solutions. Okay. Yeah. So basically, like those, like I was saying, remember that I was saying alcohol where it could become vapor, right? Yes. So at least the low retention helps to keep them there longer as well, right? So you're able to relatively aspirate and dispense very precisely as well. Okay. Yeah. What you saying? Yeah.
I think the keyword is talking about low retention. It's always about consistency. It's true. It's true. Yeah, the SDS, all the DNA cloning, whatsoever, those who are at a higher level of research need to have a low retention pipette tips. But not just that. I think it's something you always do. Let's say if you're an undergrad student, if you do a serial dilution, sometimes you might notice why your solution always deviated too far. You already use serial dilution properly, but then the result is not what as you expected, because if you use a normal pipette tips, when you aspirate or dispense, you might notice some residue is still inside the pipette tips. So by having a low retention pipette tips, this should be able to encounter this problem. When you aspirate is what you intend to aspirate. What you dispense is what you intend to dispense. Yep,
that's true. Low retention can help to solve the problem when you do it accurately. There is a technique where you could do with normal ones as well, right? Where you make sure that you aspirate in the second, you can say fraction, but a bit more, right? So that you're able to equally mix and you don't lose in between. But yeah, obviously, if you do not do it correctly, the technique of actually mixing it as you do the dilution, right?
Yes.
Then you might lose out more than actually doing low retention. You're right on that. Actually.
Betul.
Yeah.
I agree with you. There are a few more weird type of pipette tips. We'll pipette the bulb and rack, compare between filtered, non-filtered, sterile, non-sterile. There are some more odd cases where they also sometimes have a white ball or orifice tips. What is that actually?
Okay. Speaking about that, there's one more thing I need to mention first about low retention that I missed out, right? So after we can go whiteboard because they're connected. So one of the things, right? I would say the disadvantage really depends on the situation as well, right? So this is where the manufacturer themselves might accidentally cause that, right? So
how is that possible?
Well, basically it is because obviously there are different polypropylene blend, okay, and then they might also add a silicone coating as well, right? And that's adding the inner walls of the pipette tips, right, of the low retention. So that itself, right, after some use, right, it might actually cross-contaminate with your sample. But normally that is a very rare case situation, unless like you're using certain, you can say, solutions that could interact. But just be aware that it can happen, basically, right? But normally it's quite unlikely, okay? So because they can wash out, they can leach onto your sample as well. So sometimes certain manufacturers you will use a different composition, right? So this is where testing out the low retention tips as well, like testing universal bulk tips, right, to know whether it could leak out or not and interact with sample. So if, like, say, you're doing normally without low retention, and suddenly you use this low retention from a brand that could have cross-contaminate and then cause something to be in the sample they never seen, right? I see. Maybe you have a sample that you run through HPLC, MS, right? And then how come there's a certain signal I never seen before? Then you kind of know that's probably some component that gives a low retention that have leached out into your sample. Okay, so there's something that you just have to double check on that. Okay. So jump back to the white orifice. Sorry, just need to clarify that, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a good knowledge though. Yeah.
It is. The white orifice ones are basically the tip, right? If you have a photo of that, right, you put it up. They have a tip, basically, right, at the bottom part, right, it's actually much more wider. Okay? So you will notice that as if like the pipette tip is broken. It's not, okay? Yeah, unless you purposely cut it open, of course, right? Some people could do that. But yeah, so white orifice tips, or we call it sometimes white bore tips, right? They are the tips where they can allow samples to be easily aspirated up and down. Again, you are mixing it as usual, right? For certain molecular situations, right? But again, it's more for fragile samples, sometimes cellular samples as well, okay, more for molecular samples like DNA and RNA ones, right, where you have already extracted with very long libraries, which you could be presuming to be maybe above 50 kilobases of length, like really, really, really long, okay, abnormally long for gel runs, or even abnormally long for typical sequencing ones, okay, and basically, right, by having white or bore or white orifice tips, right, you're able to mix it gently, basically, despite having same amount of force. By having a typical tips instead of a white bore, right, you're forcing through a very, very narrow gap. If you have your pipette tip with you right now, right, wherever you're watching in the lab or not, you can grab a tip and you see that the tip, the edge of the tip, right, it's very, very small, right. So when you're actually aspirating up and down, right, you're actually forcing it through very hard. Although yes, you might be just normally doing it gently, yes, but it translates at the bottom of the tip to very high force. That alone could actually break a lot of things, right? But again, if that is not your concern, then white bore or white orifice tips shouldn't be considered, right? Because it's also a little bit more pricier due to the fact that it's manufactured slightly differently with different molds as well, right? So it's really a case-by-case basis of what you're looking to do, right? So I will just add that basically it will prevent some shearing and it reduces flow resistance, basically, okay? Yeah, I think those are the main ones for white orifice, white bore, yeah. Do I see it using every day? No, right? But if I'm not mistaken, the only size that it comes is normally in 200s. That's because normally the work that requires, the amount that you normally aspirate dispense is normally around the 200 microliter ones.
I see.
Yeah.
Alright. So let's say I get a normal, this type, and I cut using scissors, will it work?
Yes and no. So you have to remember when you cut it, right?
Yes.
So it's not a clean cut like the machine,
Uh-huh.
right? So you might get a deformed tip at the bottom, right? And then you might cause way more problems. And again, it's non-sterile by then, right? Because your scissors, unless you can't really sterile scissors, that's one, right? And in doing the biosafety cabinet, you have to cut every single tip, right, in another. And by the time you cut, you need to autoclave again. So another set of problems as well, right? Yeah. Oh, by the way, white ball, you can get it sterile as well, right? So it make it easy because white ball with molecular. Last thing you do is to cut the tip and then autoclave and then
betul.
cross-contaminate again.
So you think might sound good, but it's a dumb idea. So don't. Interesting.
Don't tell us if you've done it. By the way.
Okay. You mentioned about those with this wider white ball size only come up with 200 microliter size pipette tips.
Yep.
Which also something that some people might forget. Some haven't been addressed properly. There are different type of volumes of pipette tips. We have 10 microliter, we have even 100, 200. Sometimes also have 300 microliter, 1000. 1 ml and 10 ml. There are so many variety of pipette tips size that we can choose. Is there any golden rule which to choose and why?
Good question, actually. Okay. Normally, the 3 existing sizes that's available right in the market is the 10, the 200, and the 1000. Okay. Let me go backtrack a bit here. Actually, it's more on the colors first. Yeah.
Okay.
So when you see the colors right here, right, you can bring it over. Yeah. So this again, I'll bring one over. Yeah. Okay. So you can see, right, basically, if you can see very clearly from the video, right, you can see that there is the white color, the yellow color, and the blue color. Sorry if you're colorblind, but hopefully you can see them, yeah? I mean, yeah. So if not, basically, you can, if you are colorblind, you can feel this on the size of the tips. You can feel that one is like really, really small, one is like medium size, one is like huge, right? So I think you can tell based on feel as well, okay? And normally, the small ones, right, like the white ones that comes in 10 microliters. That is the standard one, although there are smaller ones, but most cases, if you are working even with
or small, minute volume, is it?
1 microliter, 2 microliters, right? The 10 microliters is fine, actually. Okay. Then the yellow ones that comes in either hundreds or 200s.
Yes.
Normally, best to get 200 because if you are using 100 microliter, 100 pipette tip in a 200 pipette, you might accidentally aspirate too much as well. So it's standard that you get a 200 one. It might not fit perfectly because I've seen some that only requested 100 for the purpose, but at least with the 200, you are much more safer as well. So that's the yellow one. And the last one, the blue one, is for 1000. Okay? And basically, sometimes the blue ones, there's also 1250 as well, right? Which is for some of the pipettes that can take more. So just bear in mind with that. I'll mention that some of these, right, although they say 10, 200, and 1000, as you can see right here, right, from our Gaia Science logo brand, the actual amount that the pipette can take is actually a little bit more, okay? And that is for just in case that it might go up too close to your pipette itself, right? So just bear in mind that although they say 10, it might be a little bit more, 200, it might be a little bit more, 1000, it might be a little bit more. Again, it depends on your pipette. If you can take more than usual, or maybe the highest amount can is abnormally higher than what it is, test it out first. But it's at your own risk as well. Yeah. So I would say that normally you also want to choose a high capacity one as well.
High capacity.
Yeah. So basically bigger than what your pipette, what you normally do for safety as well. It won't affect the amount you aspirate up and down.
Okay.
Right. So that one is already dependent on how you can fit.
Betul.
Yeah.
Betul.
So that would be what I would say. So yeah.
I see. So I guess there are so many pipette tips that are also in the market now. It really depend on the application and usage as well.
Okay.
So just to wrap up everything.
Yep.
So first question we have right and bulk. And ideally, I mean technically you can say bulk is cheaper compared to right, but there are pros and cons you have to consider as well.
Yes, of course.
Although bulk is cheaper, but think again about the time that we spend for repacking, and think again about the sterility, because when you purchase it right, 100%, I think most of the product out there in the market right is always sterile. Am I right?
Yes, correct. Because
it's sterile.
they're always packed up together. Yeah.
Yes, talking about steroid is you cannot simply just get this thing out of cliff and you can claim it as steroid. No, there are more to that. We're not just talking about biological combination here. We're talking about the RNAs. We're talking about the RNAs, and then we're also talking about the paragen endotoxin contamination there. This is something that we are always trying to avoid, particularly if you're working with a molecular or human or live sample.
That's right.
Wanting this to interrupt your result, because you might think you save more money, but actually you will end up spend more because you need to troubleshoot or research all that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So like you're saying, right, if you want to bring everything together, right, and then you're thinking of now how you're going to buy. So you're right. You can get a rack ones that has tips that is basically placed in the rack for you in advance. You can have it sterile, and then like say with molecular work, you have it filtered as well. And since you don't really need to have it so long, you can have it short as well. And since you might be using different pipettes, because I'm sure that most of your labs, you don't just use one brand, you might use many brands as well, right? So you will get a universal version as well. Okay. And since you are normally doing with molecular work, you will have a low retention version as well. And I guess for this purpose, we can say you can get 1 to 200 microliters, right?
Yes.
So you can see that the set of configuration for these rack tips is already going to be racked, sterile, filtered, short, universal, low retention, and at the size of 200 microliters, right? So that's the one way you can configure your rack tips as well. Now, I would also add on top of that, let's say, another way you can get another configuration that you might see as well, right? This is cell culture, by the way. Okay. So this one you mentioned was molecular. If it's cell culture, right, you might get basically a typical rack tips as well. If you don't go for bulk, okay, you might go for a rack that is sterile, okay, short as well, and universal. You don't really need low retention. You don't really need white orifice tips, right? Okay, and maybe in this situation, since I'm working with a lot of media, I might be aspirating, dispensing cells. So the 1,000 is enough because the hole also is bigger than the 200 and the 10. So I don't really need to use 200 in that situation, right? So if I want to do a little bit on taking out from stock and putting it into a new set right after doing cell counting as well, right? Which, by the way, check our website for that. Yeah, we got cell counting and also laser imaging as well. Okay, yeah. Actually, I did a webinar on that as well, so please check. Yeah,
check out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the configuration you might get. So you don't really need to have every single one, right? You handpick which configuration you want, right? So from what we've discussed throughout the whole podcast, right? Yeah, for video podcast, right? And then you can see which one makes sense to you.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So today we have discussed so many things, different type of pipette tips, whether bulk or whether rack, is that fitted or non-fitted, sterile or non-fertile, or there are different color, different size, low retention and normal. There are so many things we have discussed. I think we have learned so many things. So before we end today's session, Dr. Tan, is there any final thought before we end this?
Final thoughts, I would say happy pipetting, okay? Right. So make sure, hope that, and pray for you all also, that you guys have a very smooth sailing on pipetting, right? Perfect tips, perfect pipette, and everything goes smoothly, and hopefully, have a good time pipetting. Yeah. No matter if it's very tedious or not, right? Because I've gone through that. But anyway, happy pipetting.
Well, as I mentioned earlier today, choosing a pipette is not something you just what you're going to wear. Your type of pipette is going to use have to be consider what type of research you're doing. Is it relevant or not? Is it suitable or not? All that. Hopefully, from all this, you will get a rough idea what to do. If let's say you are still lost, don't know which one to choose, you can always feel free to contact us. We are more than happy to help you guys. So stay tuned for our upcoming video where we'll discuss more about the forward and reverse pipetting technique and more.
Yes.
Alright, so see you guys next time.
Right. Take care, guys.